Hello and welcome. I hope you have seen the introduction video to this extremely long chapter. Roald Dahl is an extremely interesting writer. This story is a little long, but it's not a very difficult story, and it's a story which is very modern. In today's day and age, you can pretty much relate to with the advent of things like ChatGPT, okay, which some people would think have made writing very easy. I would say they have made writing pretty dumb, okay, because the kind of inaccuracies that ChatGPT introduces into whatever you ask, and I've experimented with it and I'm not a fan of it at all. Okay, now I've already introduced this particular chapter, so I will not get into it and instead get into this particular chapter straight away. And I think this will need several videos because I don't want to kind of do it in one omnibus video जो कि आप देखिए अरे 1.5 hours का वीडियो है, अरे इसको अभी नहीं करते हैं. I'll do it in several parts, maybe 4, 5, 6, I don't know how many parts. So we will see as we go along. So the Great Automatic Grammatizator, written by Roald Dahl in the year 1954. Well, Knight, my boy, now it is finished. Now that it is finished, I just called you in to tell you I think you have done a fine job. So this is Mr. Bolan telling Knight. These are the two main characters of this particular story. Adolf Knight, he's the other person, stood still in front of Mr. Bolan's desk. There seemed to be no enthusiasm in him at all. So when he is complimenting him, congratulating him, saying that great, you have done a great job, Adolf Knight does not display any kind of interest. And the interpersonal relations between Mr. Bolan and Adolf Knipe बोलना बड़ा मुश्किल है, you keep slurring on it, is a very complex one. It's not an easy kind of a relationship in the sense that it's very obvious that both of them do not particularly like each other. But they maintain a facade. They maintain an outward show that, okay, we will have to work. It's pretty much like how you would be in school. You may not really like the person who you sit next to, but you're forced to by the teacher that you need to sit with this boy, you need to sit with this girl, right? Similarly, when you go to work in an organization, if there are 25 other people, it's obvious that you're not going to like all the other 24 people, right? But you will have to work together as part of a team. So Knipe and Bolan are a team, right? In that sense. He says, aren't you pleased? Because he immediately realizes that this guy is not showing any enthusiasm. If I tell you that great, you have scored 9 out of 10 marks, congratulations, a lot of improvement over the last time. I expect you to feel happy and say that, wow, good, oh, I made improvement, fine. But Knipe does not show any kind of enthusiasm. Oh yes, Mr. Bolan, did you see what the paper said this morning? What has been printed in the newspapers? No, sir, I did not. The man behind the desk pulled a folded newspaper towards him and began to read. The building of the great automatic computing engine ordered by the government some time ago is now complete. So they are talking about a computing engine which was ordered by the government to be made, and the work on that is now complete. Now, what is the great automatic computing engine all about? It is probably the fastest electronic calculating machine in the world today. This is what you need to remember, because this is the first machine that we are talking about. We have not yet come to the grammatizator, right? So we are talking about the fastest electronic calculating machine in the world today. Okay, so you need to remember these words. What is it supposed to do? It is to satisfy the ever-increasing need of science, of industry and administration for rapid mathematical calculation. This is important. This part is important. Which in the past by traditional methods would have been physically impossible. So complex mathematical, basically talking of something like a high-end calculator, and would have required more time than the problems justified. The speed with which the new engine works, said Mr. John Bolan, that's his full name. He was the head of the firm of electrical engineers. Okay, so he's an electrical engineer. Please remember all the small details which are there in the story from the point of view of MCQs, from the point of view of reasoning also. So what was he happy about in the newspaper? You need to write this part, right? In a reasoning question. mainly responsible for its construction, may be grasped by the fact that it can provide the correct answer in 5 seconds to a problem that would occupy a mathematician for a month. So that's the kind of speed that we are talking about, that to answer something in 5 seconds, which would take a mathematician almost a month. In 3 minutes, it can produce a calculation that by hand, if it were possible, would fill 500,000 sheets of foolscap paper. Now, foolscap is something like 300 to 200 millimeter kind of measurement. Basically, it's a type of paper which was used for writing before computers were invented. The automatic computing engine uses pulses of electricity. What does it use? This is important. Which is generated at the rate of 1,000,000 a second. These are small details जो कि आपको याद रखने पड़ेंगे. You will need to remember because this story contains a lot of these kind of detail. So from the point of view of MCQs, you would do well to remember all these intricate details. To solve all calculations that resolve themselves into addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. For practical purposes, there is no limit to what it can do. Okay, so there is no limit. It can actually do a lot in terms of mathematical calculations. Mr. Bolen glanced up at the long, melancholy meaning sad, face of the younger man, that is Adolf Knipe. Aren't you proud, Knipe? Aren't you pleased? So he has also been part of the project. Of course, Mr. Bolen. So you realize that this guy is not really kind of being very forthcoming. I don't think I have to remind you that your own contribution, especially to the original plans, was an important one. That is, so Mr. Bolen is being gracious, okay, at least on the face of it. He's acknowledging the contribution made by Knipe to the implementation of this particular project. In fact, I might go so far as to say, in fact, I would actually say this, I would even say this, that without you and some of your ideas, this project might still be on the drawing board today. That is, it would be still as an idea, it would not have been implemented if it were not for your ideas and if it was not for you. So he's kind of acknowledging Knipe's contribution to the implementation part of the project. So what do you gather if you read the story only till here? You gather that this Knipe, even though he's not a man of too many words, he doesn't talk much, he doesn't acknowledge, he doesn't show any enthusiasm, even then he's someone, you realize that this guy seems to be someone important, someone who is a man of ideas, who has contributed immensely to Mr. Bolen's that entire project, who was the head. And Mr. Bolen, what is the impression you gather about Mr. Bolen from now? It may not be true, but I'm just trying to kind of gauge whether you're understanding that he's being gracious. That's what. But all this is actually not true, at least with regard to Mr. Bolen. Adolf Knipe moved his feet on the carpet and he watched the two small white hands of his chief, the nervous fingers playing with a paper clip, unbending it, straightening out the hairpin curve. So, you know, whenever anybody is fidgeting a lot, playing a lot with the pencil, with the pen, with the rubber, eraser, or with any other instrument or any other thing which is kept, tool which is kept on the table, it kind of reveals a slight sense of nervousness maybe. He didn't like the man's hand. So you see, he refers to it as nervous fingers. He did not like the man's hands. Now you see, it's very peculiar that you're not talking about the man's personality. You're saying, I don't like the man's hands. And why? He didn't like his face either. He did not like his tiny mouth and the narrow purple colored lips. So these are important physical features of Mr. Bolen, which you should again remember. Just mark it in your book. Okay, visual memory always plays an important role, because when you're writing in the examination, you would recall that, okay, with a red pencil, I had marked these physical features of Mr. Bolen. Visual memory, trust me, it has huge impact. It was unpleasant the way only the lower lip moved when he talked. Very weirdly, that the upper lip did not move. Is anything bothering you, Knipe? Anything on your mind? That is there something which is kind of worrying you? Oh no, Mr. Bolen, no. How would you like to take a week's holiday? Do you good? You have earned it. Saying that you deserve a week's holiday. You have earned it. Why don't you take it? Because he thinks he's not looking too well, and perhaps a holiday of a week would do him a world of good. I don't know, sir. The older man waited, watching this thin person who stood so sloppily before. So now, so far, we have seen Mr. Bolan through the eyes of Knipe. Now we are going to look at Knipe through the eyes of Mr. Bolan. The older man waited, watching this tall, thin person who stood so sloppily. Sloppily means he's a little shabby in his appearance. He was a difficult boy. He was not easy to work with. Why couldn't he stand up straight? So he's getting irritated with him. He's feeling irritated. Always drooping and untidy with spots on his jacket. So his jacket is not tidy, is not clean, and hair falling all over his face. I would like you to take a holiday, Knipe. You need it. All right, sir, if you wish. Take a week, 2 weeks if you like. Go somewhere warm, go to some warm place. Get some sunshine, so that you feel more rejuvenated and positive. Swim, relax, sleep, then come back and we will have another talk about the future. Adolf Knipe did nothing of the sort. Adolf Knipe went home by bus to his two-room apartment. He threw his coat on the sofa, poured himself a drink of whiskey, and sat down in front of the typewriter that was on the table. Mr. Bolan was right. Of course he was right, except that he did not know the half of it. What was it that Knipe was anxious about, was worrying about? Mr. Bolan had absolutely no clue. He probably thought it was a woman. That was he was in love and his love affair had kind of not worked out. So he thought maybe he's worried about that. Whenever a young man gets depressed, everyone thinks it's a woman, a woman who is the cause of it. It wasn't the case here with Knipe. He leaned forward and began to read through the half-finished sheet of typing that still in the machine. It was headed "A Narrow Escape." So now you realize that Knipe is actually a writer. Okay, he's a writer. And it began. The night was dark and stormy. The wind whistled in the trees. The train poured down like cats and dogs. Adolf Knipe took a sip of whiskey, tasting the malty bitter flavor, feeling the trickle of cold liquid as it traveled down his throat and settled in the top of his stomach. Cool at first, then spreading and becoming warm. So he's describing the entire impact the whiskey is having on his body, making a little area of warmness in the gut. To hell with Mr. John Bolan anyway, and to hell with the great electrical computing machine. To hell with. And at that point of time, it was like an eureka moment. Something struck his mind at that point of time when he was actually being very dismissive about everything, kind of, saying, I don't give a damn. Exactly at that moment, his eyes and mouth began slowly to open in a sort of wonder. And slowly he raised his head and became still, absolutely motionless, gazing at the wall opposite with his look that was more perhaps of astonishment than of wonder. So there is an idea which has occurred to him at that precise moment when he was kind of being very not appreciative about anything, the computing machine, about John Bolan, about anything. At that point of time, there was something which struck him. But quite fixed now, unmoving and remaining thus for 40, 50, 60 seconds. Then gradually, the head still motionless, a subtle change. Subtle means a very little change, spreading over the face, astonishment becoming pleasure. So astonishment is an indication of surprise, mild shock, and that turned into an expression of feeling good with himself, of pleasure. Very slight at first and only around the corners of the mouth, increasing gradually, spreading out until at last the whole face was wide open and shining with extreme delight. And by the end of, let's say 60 seconds, he was grinning from ear to ear. There was a wide grin. He was feeling very happy and he was almost like laughing. It was the first time Adolf Knipe had smiled in many, many months because he had got an idea. Of course, he said, speaking aloud, it is completely ridiculous. Again he smiled, raising his upper lip and baring his teeth in a queerly sensual manner. In the sense that something which gave him pleasure. So what he has got is a brainwave. Something, a great idea has occurred to him, and the very thought of this great idea is giving him extreme sense of pleasure. It's a delicious idea. Now it's very interesting because delicious is an adjective you normally associate with food, right? But here he's talking about an idea as being delicious because he thinks it's an idea that he can consume and make use of, develop it into something. So it's like food. You kind of make different uses with the same food, with the same ingredients, right? But so impracticable, it doesn't really bear thinking about it at all. So it's a great idea, but it's an extremely impractical idea. From then on, Adolf Knipe began to think about nothing else. The idea fascinated him enormously. At first, because it gave him a promise, however remote, of revenging himself in a most devilish manner upon his greatest enemies. So he's saying that it's an impractical idea, but it's a delicious idea. Please use these keywords. The idea is referred to as delicious, though it is impractical. But he thinks that if it actually turns out to be true, if he's able to implement it, it will actually allow him, it will offer an opportunity to Knipe to take revenge on his enemies, greatest enemies, in the most devilish manner. Again, underlying these keywords because they tell you a lot about Knipe as a person, right? So imagine he's thinking about an idea, and the first thought that has occurred to him is that if nothing else, it will allow him to take revenge. So you realize that vengefulness is an integral part of Knipe's personality as well. He's not a very positive kind of person. There are these shades of gray in him. From this angle alone, he toyed idly with it for perhaps 10 or 15 minutes. Then all at once, he found himself examining it quite seriously as a practical possibility, that it may just be possible. Toyed idly means, he's just kind of looking at it, let's see whether it's possible, kind of looking at it from different angles, what could be exactly possible. It's like you are trying to put together a particular project. You look at it from different angles, from what side I should approach it so that, it can get started, right? And then you think, once you get this thing that, oh, if I start like this, it is a possibility that I would be able to implement it. He took paper and made some preliminary notes, but he didn't get far. He found himself almost immediately up against the old truth that a machine, however ingenious, however, in terms of being very intelligent and however being very in terms of being its ability to do something very good, is incapable of original thought. A machine is a machine. A machine is only as good as the material that you have put into it. Samjhe na? A machine is, because a machine is a creation of man. It can only work according to what you have fed into it, what it is capable of doing. What you have not programmed it to do, it will never be able to do. It will not be able to think. It doesn't have a brain of its own. Its brain is what you have fed into it. It can handle no problems except those that resolve themselves into mathematical terms, problems that contain one and only one correct answer. So if it is a mathematical problem, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. It knows that, it will be able to solve that. But anything beyond that, anything beyond where it could be more than one answer, more than one possible answer, a machine will not be able to comprehend that and do anything intelligent with it. This was a stumper. Stumper as in, it was like an obstacle. This was like a hurdle. This was like something which would kind of be an obstacle. There didn't seem any way around it. A machine cannot have a brain. On the other hand, it can have a memory. Can it not? It can have a memory. It cannot have a brain. Now, this is interesting because in human beings, we associate brain with memory. आपको याद कहाँ रहता है? अपने दिमाग में आपको याद रहता है, right? You remember everything in your brain. So we normally associate the brain with memory. But here he's making the distinction. A machine can have memory even if it does not have a brain. Their own electronic calculator had a marvelous memory, the one which he had developed along with Mr. Bolan. Simply by converting electric pulses through a column of mercury into supersonic waves, now he's telling the technical aspects of it, it could store away at least 1,000 numbers at a time, extracting any one of them at the precise moment it was needed. Would it not be possible, therefore, on this principle, using the same logic, to build a memory section of almost unlimited size? That is, you are having a limited memory wherein you could store at least 1,000 numbers and you could extract any one of them and do any kind of calculation with those numbers, right? So if that is possible, a limited number is possible. Can't, using the same principle, you could build a memory section of almost unlimited size. Basically उस time पे मुझे नहीं मालूम था whether he knew about GP and all that kind of thing. कितना data can be stored. Now what about that? Then suddenly he was struck by a powerful but simple little truth, and it was this: that English grammar is governed by rules that are almost mathematical in their strictness, right? You will say that when there are rules as to when you will use will, when you will use would, when you will use should, when you will use must, when you will use can, when you will use could, when you will use could, when you will use would, right? We know all those rules. So he's saying that English grammar is also essentially governed by this set of rules which are pretty strict. Okay, so he is trying to correlate, he's trying to make a comparison between mathematics, between the world of mathematics and the world of English grammar, in order to see that the things that we applied there for mathematical calculations, can I apply the same to the world of English grammar? I hope I'm making it pretty clear, and also you're able to understand at the speed with which I'm going. Given the words and given the sense, so this is an important line, which is why it is also in bold letters, at least in this particular PDF. Given the words and given the sense of what is to be said, then there is only one correct order in which those words can be arranged, which we know is not the case, because I can express an idea in a particular order. You may express the same thought in a slightly different kind of order and language. Just hold on for a second. Let me just drink some water and come. I'm very thirsty. I wonder when the water is drunk, what kind of sound is created by the mic. Okay, so he says that given the words and given the sense of what is to be said, then there is only one correct order in which those words can be arranged. At least that's what Knight believes so at that point in time. No, he thought that isn't quite accurate. In many sentences, there are several alternate positions for words and phrases. So you see, he's constantly thinking, negating his own position. So he comes across as someone who is trying to kind of think through all kinds of permutations and combinations, all kinds of possibilities, all of which may be grammatically correct, but what the hell, the theory itself is basically true, therefore it stands to reason. Therefore it stands to reason means therefore it is true that an engine built along the lines of the electric computer could be adjusted to arrange words instead of numbers in the right order according to the rules of grammar. Give it the verbs, the nouns, the adjectives, the pronouns, store them in the memory section as a vocabulary, and arrange for them to be extracted as required. Then feed it with plots and leave it to the write the sentences. So this is his plan, that using the same template of the mathematical computing engine, use it, make it adapt to the world of English grammar. That's the plan that Knipe has in mind. There was no stopping Knipe now. He went to work immediately, and there followed during the next few days a period of intense labor. The living room became littered with sheets of paper, formulae and calculations, lists of words, thousands and thousands of words, the plots of stories curiously broken up and subdivided, huge extracts from Roger's thesaurus. Thesaurus is where you get the synonyms. I always tell my students that dictionary, always make dictionary and thesaurus your friend. So this is the thesaurus that I have it here. I have another one which is a slightly smaller version. So a dictionary and a thesaurus should always be there with you, always. It's important. Okay, so pages filled. This is the Oxford thesaurus. There's also a Rogers thesaurus. I've got a smaller one. I think I have it at my parents' place. Anyway, pages filled with the first names of men and women, hundreds of surnames taken from the telephone directory, intricate drawings of wires and circuits and switches and thermionic walls, technical details, nothing really much to explain, drawings of machines that could punch holes of different shapes in little cards, and of a strange electric typewriter that could type 10,000 words a minute. Also a kind of control panel with a series of small push buttons, each one labeled with the name of a famous American magazine, right? So this is what he kind of started developing. Okay, so you see, it's a mix of English grammar in the form of Roger's thesaurus, words, stories, etc. And he's kind of mixing it up. He's trying to make it adapt to the world of thermionic walls, machines, electric typewriter, right? Control panel, which is all the technical bits. So he's trying to marry the two. That's what he's trying to achieve. He was working in a mood of exultation. Exultation is, a sense of great excitement. Prowling is like, it's used to describe Adolf Knife's movements, right? It kind of also conveys a predator, who's slowly moving. How does a tiger or a leopard move towards a deer, right? When it's going to just catch the deer, taking the deer unawares, right? So that's a kind of mood. Prowling around the room amidst his littering of paper all over the place, rubbing his hands together like this, talking out loud to himself, and sometimes with a slight curl of the nose, he would mutter a series of murderous imprecations. Imprecation is a spoken curse, and he would generally curse the editors, right? In which the word editor seemed always to be present. So he didn't really have any love lost or any fondness for the editors. So he would curse the editors. So imprecations is a spoken curse, and in this particular case, he would curse the editors. Of the 15th day of continuous work, he collected the papers into 2 large folders, which he carried. 15th day, why? Because he had been given 2 weeks of leave by Mr. Bolan. Almost at a run to the offices of John Bolan Incorporated Electrical Engineers. Now that's the name of the company which was being run by Mr. Bolan. Mr. Bolan was pleased to see him back. Well, Knipe, good gracious me, you look 100% better. You have a good holiday. Where did you go? So he assumes that he thinks he's looking better. Actually, he doesn't think so. But he's just being gracious in the way he speaks, just like we saw him 2 weeks ago. He's just as ugly and untidy as ever, he thinks. Mr. Bolan thought, why doesn't he stand up straight? He looks like a bent stick. You look 100% better, my boy. So you see, he does not ever speak his mind. He doesn't kind of, say what is there on his mind. On his mind, he thinks this fellow is looking so untidy, right? But on the face of it, he says that, oh, where did you go on a holiday? You look so much better. It's an important aspect of Mr. Bolan's personality. Please make a note of it. I wonder what he is grinning about. Every time I see him, his ears seem to have got larger. Adolf Knipe placed the folders on the desk. Look, Mr. Bolan, he cried. Look at these. Then he poured out his story. He opened the folders and pushed the plans in front of the astonished little man. So Mr. Bolan is obviously, small built. He talked for over an hour, explaining everything. And when he had finished, he stepped back, breathless, flushed. Flushed means, his face had kind of lost color, waiting for the verdict. That is, verdict from Mr. Bolan as to what he thought of it. You know what I think, Naib? I think you are nuts. Means that you are a fool. You are a crazy guy. Careful now, Mr. Bolan told himself. Treat him carefully. Now, he had said, now this, see, that's Mr. Bolan's real self. What he actually thinks of Naib. That has come out now. But now he himself tells her, cool, let me, wo Munna Bhai MBBS mein how Bomman Irani's character behaves, right? He gets angry and then he will immediately say, cool, and then he will try to, that you need to take a deep breath and kind of thing. Then he realizes that he should not be so sharp and pungent. He says, careful now, Mr. Bolan told himself, treat him carefully. He's valuable. This one is because he was integral to the project, the mathematical project. If only he did not look so awful with that long horse face and the big teeth. The fellow had ears as big as rhubarb's leaves. Now that is a plant whose leaves are very large. Mr. Bolan, it will work. I have proved to you it will work. You cannot deny that. Take it easy now, Naib. Take it easy and listen to me. Adolf Naib watched his man, disliking him more every second. So it's a very hate-hate relationship. There is no love lost between the two men. This idea Mr. Bolan's lower lip was saying, and you see he's trying to kind of make fun, right? Because his upper lip did not move when he spoke. He's very ingenious. I might almost say brilliant, if only. Now you see, he's now saying brilliant. Just 2 seconds back, he had said that you are nuts. And it only goes to confirm my opinion of your abilities, Naib. But don't take it too seriously. After all, my boy, what possible use can it be to us? Who on earth wants a machine for writing stories? And where is the money in it anyway? Just tell me that. And now you realize in today's day and age, you have machines which actually churn out novels based on whatever material you put into it. So Roald Dahl, in pretty much ahead of his times, able to predict what will really happen in the future. May I sit down, sir? Sure, take a seat. Adolf Naib seated himself on the edge of a chair. The older man watched him with alert brown eyes, wondering what was coming now. I would like to explain something, Mr. Bolan, if I may, about how I came to do all this. Go right ahead, Naib. He would have to be humored a little now, Mr. Bolan told himself. The boy was really valuable, a sort of genius, almost worth his weight in gold to the firm. So this is what he really thought in terms of his abilities as an engineering kind of a person. Just look at these papers here. Darnest thing you ever saw, that there is something very good material in those papers. Astonishing piece of work. Quite useful, useless, of course, no commercial value. So in terms of ability, darnest essentially means that, is referring to the effort that has been put into creating that work. But he says that it is useless in terms of commercial value because who needs a machine for writing stories? For calculating, yes, you need to do 7 into 2 into 28 into 35 divided by 54. You need a calculator to be able to do that. But who needs a machine for calculating, for writing stories? But it proved again the boy's ability. It's a sort of confession, I suppose, Mr. Bolan. I think it explains why I have always been so kind of worried. You tell me anything you want, Naib. I'm here to help you. You know that. The young man clasped his hands together tight on his lap, hugging himself with his elbows. It seemed as though suddenly he was feeling very cold. You see, Mr. Bolan, to tell the honest truth, I don't really care much for my work here. I know I'm good at it and all that sort of thing, but my heart is not in it. It's not what I want to do most. Up went Mr. Bolan's eyebrows, quick like a spring. His whole body became very still. You see, sir, all my life I have wanted to be a writer. A writer? Yes, Mr. Bolan. You may not believe it, but every bit of spare time I've had, I have spent writing stories. So this is Naib making a confession, which Mr. Bolan seems to be completely unaware of. In the last 10 years, I have written literally hundreds of short stories, 566 to be precise, approximately one a week. Please remember this number, 566. Good heavens, man, what on earth did you do that for? All I know, sir, is that I have the urge. There's a creative urge to write stories. What sort of urge? The creative urge. Mr. Bolan, every time he looked up, he saw Mr. Bolan's lips. They were growing thinner and more purple. And may I ask you, what do you do with these stories? Well, sir, that's the trouble. No one will buy them. Each time I finish one, I send it out on the rounds that he will send it to an editor. It goes to one magazine after another. That's all that happens, Mr. Bolan, and they simply send it back. It's very depressing, which is precisely why he was cursing the editor, because the editors reject what he has written, reject his stories, they send it back, and none of his stories, 566 stories, have got published, and that's what has making him very depressed. So he wants to come up with a machine that would put writers out of business, and he would be able to replace many of them. So he wants to get back at them in this manner. Mr. Bolan, relax. I can see quite well how you feel, my boy. His voice was dripping with sympathy. We all go through it one time or another in our lives. But now that you have had proof, positive proof from the experts themselves, from the editors, that your stories are, well, what shall I say, rather unsuccessful, it's time to leave off. If your stories are not good enough to be published, is there really a point in pursuing writing? Is what he's trying to counsel Knight. Forget it, my boy, just forget all about it. No, Mr. Bolan, no, that's not true. I know my stories are good. My heavens, when you compare them with the stuff some of those magazines print, oh my word, Mr. Bolan, the sloppy, boring stuff. Sloppy means very badly written, lazy kind of writing that you see in the magazines week after week. Why? It drives me mad. So he thinks that his stories are actually much better in terms of quality than the kind of stuff that is published by the magazines every week. So he has a good opinion of himself, despite the fact that all the editors so far have rejected his 566 stories. Now, now wait a minute, my boy. Now wait a minute, my boy. Do you ever read the magazines, Mr. Bolan? You will pardon me, Nai, but what has all this got to do with your machine? Everything, Mr. Bolan, absolutely everything. What I want to tell you is, I have made a study of magazines, and it seems that each one, now look at this, he's being very precise with the kind of presentation he is making. He has done his homework. In those 15 days, he has done his homework, and he says, I made a study of magazines, and it seems that each one tends to have its own particular type of story. The writers, the successful ones, know this, and they write accordingly. That this particular magazine would prefer, let's say, a comedy style of writing. This particular magazine would prefer a horror kind of writing, a suspense thriller kind of writing. So the writers write tailor-made stuff for that particular magazine, which he could have also done. We don't know why he did not do the same thing. Just a minute, my boy, calm yourself down, will you? I don't think all this is getting us anywhere. Please, Mr. Bolan, hear me through. It is all terribly important. He paused to catch his breath. He was properly worked up now because he was kind of getting agitated and very excited about what he had invented. Throwing his hands around as he talked, being very, gesticulating a lot. The long toothy face with the big ears on either side simply shone with enthusiasm, and there was an excess of saliva in his mouth which caused him to speak his words wet. So you see, on my machine, by having an adjustable coordinator between the plot memory section and the word memory section, I'm able to produce any type of story I desire simply by pressing the required button. So there is a plot memory. That is, you feed in a certain number of plots into the machine, and you also feed in a certain number of words, okay, which can be used by the machine in order to work around the plots in order to create another new plot. So you could do that. Yes, I know, Naib, I know this is all very interesting, but what's the point of it? Just this, Mr. Bolan, the market is limited. We have got to be able to produce the right stuff at the right time whenever we want it. It's a matter of business, that's all. I'm looking at it from your point of view now as a commercial proposition, as a commercial idea. If you are actually able to do this, we can be successful. So he's trying to sell the idea now not just as a literary idea, but now as a commercial idea, that if you are able to handle the plot memory and the word memory section and make it work well in work together, what do you say, in tandem with each other, tangent aa raha tha, in tandem with each other, you would be able to make it work even as a commercial proposition. Okay, so let me do one thing. This is a 14-page PDF. We have done 5. We will pause here. I don't want to make it a very long video. We'll start with page number 6, the next video. Okay, so I hope you're enjoying, at least I am, as you know, how the story is evolving. So now he's in the process of trying to convince Mr. Bolan about his idea. We will see how Mr. Bolan reacts, and subsequently what do the two really make of this particular machine that will write novels and stories. Okay, so see you now in the next explanation video. Tata, bye bye.